Modern science exploded in Western Europe in the 16th and 17th centuries under people like Galileo, Kepler, Newton, Pascal, Boyle, Faraday, and so on. Every single one of them a believer in God. And that has led many historians of science, in fact most, and philosophers of science, to the conclusion that there's an intimate connection between faith in God and the rise of modern science. C.S. Lewis, as usual, put it very pithily. He said, men became scientific because they expected law in nature. And they expected law in nature because they believed in a lawgiver. In other words, far from faith in God being a hindrance to science, it was the motor that drove it. And of course, that immediately leads to a very interesting question. How is it that Newton believed in God, and as the centuries roll past, we come to the situation where Stephen Hawking, who until recently occupied Newton's chair at Cambridge, says that there is no God, and therefore we must choose between science and God. And I hope that by trying to unpack why that has happened and how it has happened, we'll at least get a way into the topic. And then, of course, I'm going to be much more interested in the questions that are to be asked. But let me state quite clearly, I'm not remotely embarrassed to be both a scientist and a Christian, because it is arguable that Christianity gave me my subject. The God hypothesis founded the base for the faith that the universe is rationally, indeed mathematically intelligible. So why is it we get Stephen Hawking, for instance, asking us to choose between science and God? Well, sometimes scientists use their authority to make statements that do not have the authority of science. Putting that another way, statements of scientists are not always or necessarily statements of science. So when Carl Sagan began his TV series Cosmos with the statement, the universe that all that is, was, or ever shall be, that's a statement by a scientist, but it is not a statement of science. And so we need to be aware of that. And I'm very aware of it, because we all go outside our own field. That makes life interesting. But of course, when we go outside our own field, as I'm doing tonight, we need to check up on the evidence coming from the experts in the field we're stepping into. Now, let's start with the science of psychology, where we're told by Richard Dawkins that God is a delusion, like Santa Claus, like our belief in Santa Claus. I find that strange, and I've met it recently quite frequently in debate with senior scientists. I find it strange because, as I often challenge an audience, who of you came to believe in Santa Claus as an adult? And I've never yet met one. But I've met thousands of people who came to believe in God as an adult. And so to simplistically put God and Santa Claus into the same class is rather naive. But of course, I understand that behind it is Freud's idea that belief in God is really a fantasy. It's a wish projection. We're not adequate in ourselves, and we need something outside ourselves in which we can trust. As Stephen Hawking himself put it, religion is a fairy story for people afraid of the dark. Now, Dawkins is not a psychiatrist, nor am I. And accusing people who believe in God of delusion is imposing a psychiatric description on them. So I thought I would consult a psychiatrist. And I read the best-selling book by Manfred Lutz, A Brief History of the Great One, German top psychiatrist. And he says, of course, if there is no God, then Freud's argument is brilliant, that religion is a wish fulfillment, a projection of the desire to have a father figure in the sky, if there is no God. But then he goes on to say, of course, if there is a God, the very same argument shows you that atheism is a projection of the desire not ever to have to give account, not ever to face the consequences of our messing up of life, of our evil desires, our murders and so on, if there is a God. And his bottom line is, of course, on the question whether there's a God or not, neither Freud, Jung or Frankl can help you at all. So I was asked to reply to Stephen Hawking's little quip, religion is a fairy story for people afraid of the dark. And so I said atheism is a fairy story for people afraid of the light. Well, you shouldn't clap really, because if you followed my argument, you'll see it proves nothing either way.